Kristen Holmes, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. We usually go into the company before anything, but
Yeah.
your background is, I think, fascinating. From the startups that you had before Whoop to leading Princeton to like the most field hockey championships ever, I think. I think you're being challenged now by that coach at UNC, but
Oh yeah, for sure.
um,
No, UNC absolutely. In terms of national championships, it's not even close. They are the clear winner. But conference championships, in the Ivy League, yeah, we're right up there.
that's awesome. So yeah, tell us about where you were before Whoop and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've been always interested in just this concept of performance and performance education. I was an athlete in the Big Ten. I played a couple sports and then competed on the U.S. national team for about 7 years, and then became the head coach at Princeton University. So my whole entire life has really been centered around trying to understand human performance and the factors that promote or limit our ability to show up and compete as the very best version of ourselves. So it really was centered around this concept of availability. How do I stay available to train and compete as consistently as possible, knowing that if I could show up every single day and train and compete, my chances of making the Olympic team or the World Cup team or the Pan American team would increase, right? If I was injured, if I was sick, that would decrease my chances. So I knew at a fundamental level that was a really important principle. And then I carried that principle over into my coaching environment and realized, really quickly that, I could be the best technician and tactician in terms of, the X's and O's, but it was really performance is so much more than that. There's this physiological piece, there's this psychological piece. So I started really going down the rabbit hole of, in terms of up-leveling my own education, getting a master's in sports performance, which had an emphasis in exercise physiology and psychology. So really trying to understand, what actually underpins our ability to, produce energy in an optimal way, to have the attentional capacity that we need to really understand, what moves around our motivation. How do we adopt a growth mindset? What are the things that we can control every day that kind of underpin that? So, I developed this really robust framework around that, and then realized that, okay, this framework is great, but how do we really practice it every day, right? If we want to, going back to this framework of availability, if we want to show up every day, how do we really get intentional about practicing the things and being aware of the things that are going to enable us to show up every day? So I started building some technology. I raised a bunch of money and hired some folks at Princeton in the area of computational biology and statistical machine learning. And we started basically pulling in API from Fitbit. So I grabbed I basically bought a bunch of their very best, the very best hardware at the time. And then they had an open API, so we could just take all of that heart rate data and we were transforming it and modeling it to make better algorithms that would give us a sense of recovery. So this was before recovery and readiness scores existed. We were basically modeling recovery and we were improving their sleep. They gave you some kind of raw insights around sleep. We were building a sleep algorithm, and I basically hired a company in New York City called Hacknocraft, and they basically took all these data and we made a mobile application. So I had all the physical stuff. I had training effect. I was pulling in first beat data at the time, which is another technology that uses heart rate. It's heart rate derived technology that uses kind of this Bluetooth capability and is kind of capturing in real time all the training that's happening on the field. I was pulling in that data. I had external load using Catapult, was pulling in those data, and really again trying to understand the training aspect. And then I had the mental health piece as well. So we were tracking purpose and efficacy and control. We were tracking value and behavior alignment. So we kind of had this calendar feature. So it was this really kind of robust platform. So everything I was teaching on the performance education side, athletes could then use the technology to kind of reinforce all of those principles on a daily basis. And it would give me insight if they would basically invite me. I would send a training effect via the calendar. So how hard they were going to work that day. They would accept that invitation, and then they get feedback on how many calories they needed to eat, how much water they needed to drink, and kind of how they needed to prepare themselves to be ready for our 4 o'clock practice. So it was really kind of a super cool interface. But one of the things that I recognized, well, so I didn't have hardware, number one. So when I became aware of Whoop and recognized that they had this hardware, they were trying to solve all similar things that I was trying to solve. That's when I ended up kind of joining forces with Whoop to kind of, integrate, I think, a lot of my thinking and ideas and around this 24/7 monitoring kind of philosophy. And and that's kind of when I ended up joining Whoop. So this is 7.5 years now I've been at Whoop.
That's awesome. Yeah, my next question was going to be, what would you have done with, having the technology of Whoop at your time at coaching, but you kind of made a loop or a workaround for it.
Yeah, I was kind of patching it together. And, anyone who's been in this space is trying to solve the same thing. How do we actually measure readiness, recovery? Like how do we actually quantify that, right? Because if I'm a coach and if I'm just a human being, like I want to kind of understand roughly how I'm adapting to all the stress that I'm putting on my body. When I understand how I'm adapting, then I can then look forward and plan my training and plan my things that I might need to do, modalities that will kind of enhance my recovery if I'm under recovered. There also might be some psychological things happening that I need to address that may be getting in the way of my ability to adapt in a really functional way. So yeah, I think that having these insights just make us a heck of a lot smarter and help us understand where to apply our effort, because that's what we're kind of trying to understand in this whole thing is, what do I need to do today to really improve my chances of performing to my capabilities?
Yeah, and not even just today, but I mean, one of my favorite things of it is I get to see over the last week, like I have my Whoop community with my friends, and I see, I got one really good day of sleep, but then I had one really bad day, or my girlfriend and I went out or something. So then my average for the whole week is just crushed because I got, woke up with a 20% recovery or whatever,
Yeah.
And being able to see, like, over time, it's not just, I slept well last night, I recovered well last night. It's, I've done this for a week now, I've done this for a month now. Now I see how much better I feel after making all of these changes, these behavioral changes over a period of time. So
they add up.
I guess that leads into, tell our listeners who, if they don't know what Whoop is, what in just a basic terms is it? Because everyone kind of, I think, thinks it's just an Apple Watch fitness tracker or whatever, but it's more than that. So
it is more than that. Yeah, it's at base level, it's a physiological monitoring device. So basically it's taking in, it doesn't have a watch, it's a band, but it has sensors that are basically pulling in your heart rate data. And then we transform those data with various algorithms that help us understand, how you're recovering. So how you're adapting to external stress. And we visualize this in the form of a recovery score. So it's for stoplight feature, red, yellow, green, and this is just a loose approximation of how your body is recovering and responding to external stress. We measure your cardiovascular load, which we call strain, and we map it on a scale of 0 to 20. So we look at not only when you are, actively really pushing your heart rate and you're on the bike or you're running, but we also measure your non-activity strain. So how hard is your heart working when you're not engaged in a specific activity? So we have activity strain readout and a non-activity strain, and we give you kind of this total day strain, we call it, that incorporates both your activity and non-activity. So and where this is different than I think some of the other devices out there, this is not just about steps, right? Steps is a very blunt instrument. It can be super helpful, but it's a blunt instrument in that steps don't tell you how hard your heart is working, right? And if we're really trying to improve our cardiovascular fitness, we need to work our heart, and we need to work our heart in very specific ways, right? And so from a coaching perspective, if we are just talking about steps, I can tell you to walk more. But if we really are trying to get to the next level in terms of our cardiovascular health and fitness and really improve longevity, we need to be a little bit more specific. And that's what I think, that's one of the core differentiators of Whoop. And then finally, we are again taking this heart rate data, and we're giving you an understanding of your sleep. So kind of bucketed into these four different categories of awake time, light sleep, REM, and slow wave sleep. So it's kind of a little bit of a crude, bucket, but this is, I think, as good as we can get right now with wearable technology, is kind of, I think, these four buckets. And it just gives you, again, just a sense of how much time you're spending in deeper stages of sleep, how much time you're spending awake and in light. And, roughly, is this a good, gives you just a sense of kind of how well you're sleeping. And then kind of on top of all of that, or is just a bunch of coaching, right? So we give you these insights about, how your body is responding and adapting, your cardiovascular load, your strain, and your sleep. And then we kind of help you understand how to improve it. So we do this in the form of behavioral insights. So like you might notice if, we have this opportunity where you can actually journal or self-report on various items that are of importance to you. So if you want to kind of understand how your caffeine intake might influence your sleep, that might be something you journal. If you're interested in alcohol and how that might influence your recovery, that could be something you journal, and your sleep. And your maybe how much load you put on the next day. We basically synthesize all of this information and give you these really robust behavioral insights. So you can then understand, okay, this behavior is health promoting. This behavior might not be health promoting. And it's not always, as simple in terms of that cause and effect, but at least we give you, some level of awareness around what might be working for you versus what might not be working for you.
Yeah, so it's all behavioral. I think that's what like the Whoop is different. It's not about like, oh, just get your steps. It's the behavioral changes in your day to day and how those form habitual routines, I guess.
Yeah.
Over time.
I think it's like linking. It's kind of showing or surfacing how behaviors actually move around these metrics that we know are correlated with health and longevity. So heart rate variability is part of, you can look at your raw number, but it's part of our recovery algorithm. And it just gives you this, and that's in heart rate variability is this wonderful marker that helps us understand, how mentally, physically, emotionally we're adapting to life's demands, and when that is, trending up, we're probably managing life really well. When it's trending down, we might be struggling, and we might be engaging in behaviors that are counterproductive to both our short-term and long-term health. So this is just like a great, a great, I think, awareness builder, in kind of making these connections between behavior and just these objective markers that we know are tell us an important story about our health.
Yeah. I've listened to and watched a ton of content with you. You seem to be literally everywhere on LinkedIn right now, as well as my social media pages on YouTube and Instagram. It's you're everywhere. So I've heard you talk a ton of just your behaviors and your habits and how your life has changed whenever you started to like factor in all of these things. What is the first and last hour of your daily?
Yeah. So I'm really committed to to reading and writing. So, and I'm always reading a book. And they're usually more on the kind of philosophical or more poetic dimensions, I think, of life. So, I'm a huge David White and John O'Donohue and Kathleen Raine, a Scottish poet most recently, Mary Oliver. So I try to start my day with those folks. And I just find it to be, one of my core values is inner peace. And I know if I don't have inner peace, I really struggle to show up in the world in the way that feels good to me. And I know that, when I am connected to, these kind of writers and thinkers I really admire, and I try to absorb their perspectives and way of thinking and internalize it and try to understand how to apply some of those learnings and things in my own life, it really grounds me. So I try to start my day with that. And then I definitely flick on all the lights. And this is just a circadian component to that, which I know people are probably sick of hearing me talk about. But yeah, I flick on all the lights. I get that light into my eyes to tell my system that it is time to be awake, and to get my hormones firing, and my cells, tissues, and organs all doing what they're supposed to be doing in that moment. So yeah, so it's light first, definitely. And even if it's dark outside, I just use a bunch of artificial light to kind of get myself going. And then once the sun comes out, or even if it's behind the cloud covers, I get outside for a good 5 to 10 minutes with my coffee or my dog, whatever, before I get in the car for work. And then I have some coffee, and then by the time I get my coffee, my kids are up. So I spend, that 7 o'clock to 8 a.m. time with them as much as I can. I make them breakfast, and I try to, engage with them to the extent that they're willing to engage with me. My daughter more so than my son. My son is just like he's getting up at the last possible moment, but my daughter's like up and organized and doing all of her things that she needs to do. So I love our mornings together. So I really cherish that, and try to do everything I can to make sure I'm there for that. And yeah, and then I usually head into work around 10, so I miss that crazy commute, and really try to leverage that time between 8 and 10 a.m. after my kids go to school. I'll do kind of some deep reading. So maybe it's a journal, it's a literature review that I'm working on, or and then I kind of tee up my podcast, whatever podcast I want to listen to for my ride in, which is usually Huberman or Drive, or I love all the scientists, but I love also Krista Tippett. She's like fills my soul. So and then I get into the office and just a bunch of meetings, and then head home late afternoon. So that's kind of my day. So that was more than an hour, but and of course I work out.
Yeah, I think when I was debating questions to ask you for this episode, I there's so many, there's a lot of like privileges that a lot of us have that we take for granted, and being able to have a morning routine is one of them. Being able to go to sleep on time, not be what you've said is like the shift workers, where you're working in those hours at night, that are detrimental to our health. And I was like, how would you tell someone, who's have some of these behaviors that are integral constraints that are integral to their day to day, essentially.
Of course.
And what I've heard you say a bunch is it's obviously routines you can change, or behaviors you can change, routines you can change, but the biggest part of all of this is just living your life by the values that you have, and that will keep you on track for a lot of it. And I think that's beautiful, and I think that's definitely something that a lot of us need to live by, whether those values are, it's just eating a little bit better, drinking a little bit less, spending time with people that we love, that fill our hearts with, dopamine without having to do anything else. It's like those are huge. I love that you do that with your little ones and everything. Let's shift to the next one. Before we got on, we were talking kind of about the point of this show being the other side of healthcare. It's the health and wellness, nutrition parts of it. What would be something that you could dream that healthcare would adapt or would adopt to advance us to be more receptive to wearables and such?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really big question. I think seeing technology as a path to help really foster human flourishing is the first step, is that I think sometimes we're afraid of the insights, because there is some truth, and kind
the
of staring. There's an accountability piece that I think is really can be really scary, actually. I've heard that so many times, just even over Christmas. I was at a Christmas party talking to my neighbor and they're like, I don't want to know, like, and I totally get that, but I think when you zoom out and you actually like think about your values for a second, like, who do I really want to be in the world? And, and then you think about that in the context of the roles that you have, as a daughter and a sister and a mother and a professional, and you start to think about, all right, how do I want to show up in those roles? I want to be engaged. I want to be present. I want to be open and tolerant and compassionate. And, and then you start to think, okay, how do I actually back into that person? And I think for all of us, it's about really understanding our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And we're just at this beautiful moment in time where we have some technology that actually help us understand how we're adapting, to stress. And I would even say how well we're living our values, right? So when we have dissonance in our life, that is, our behaviors are not reflecting at our core who we want to be, that shows up in our heart rate variability. That will manifest in my sleep, right? Am I getting into deeper stages of sleep? Well, when my life is a little chaotic and I don't feel as much purpose, or, I feel like I'm doing a lot of tasks that don't align with really who I want to be, I notice that I spend less time, in deeper stages of sleep. Or if I have a really hard conversation with one of my kids and, or they're struggling, like that impacts, my data in a really profound way. And, while I'm not always able to fix it immediately, there are levers that I can pull that can offset that. I can control my eating window. I can, jump in the cold shower or the cold lake and kind of get that hormetic effect of just, the exposure to cold, which is pretty much democratically available to all of us, a cold shower. And there's been known, there's lots of known benefits to getting in cold, water, below 59 degrees on our mental, physical, and kind of emotional resilience. So, there's things, there's levers we can all kind of pull to offset when our life might not be going in the right direction. But so I think to answer your question, there's, I think, this incredible opportunity for healthcare to start to put this story together in a way that people understand it. And I think get behind, this opportunity to help people change their behavior in a more intentional way. And so I feel there's a lot of promise with digital health. And, I think where Whoop differentiates is that, we want to be a coach in your pocket, right? We want to help you understand how to apply your effort. And this is a noisy space, right? There's a lot of crap out there. And really my job at Whoop is to do research that helps us basically understand, what is the most efficacious behavior if I want to be able to live my values with as much joy and vigor as possible, and then be able to kind of subtly and elegantly kind of coach you to those behaviors, to me is really the North Star with digital health and what I am trying to, help facilitate at Whoop through my research and just my experience. Yeah.
It's amazing. We'll get to the last question because we are coming up on time and I don't want to take too much of it of yours, but the startup world, coming from a place, obviously from a very stable position at Princeton. We're a startup too. I left Disney and came to St. Pete to this tiny company. I'm like, what am I doing? But there's a kind of risk that goes with trusting the process. And what are your what drew you away from? I think you kind of answered it with all of your questions in this episode. But what was that one thing that you were like, what, I'm gonna take that leap and go to this company and build something amazing, and with huge competitors staring you in the face with all of the wearable competition. What was it that drew you in and kept you now for so long?
Well, number one, you escape competition through authenticity. There's no question, and
genius.
Just write that down. You know, like to me, like that has been my whole entire life has been around competition, right? As an athlete, you know, I mean, I'm competing against other folks, you know, for the a spot on the Olympic team. For you know, it's just my whole life. You know, as a head coach, you're competing. But I think it's if you think about it from the lens of competition, you're missing the whole point. You know, it's about, you know, it is about going back. Okay, what do we actually value at Whoop? You know, and we are here to unlock human performance, and we just stay absolutely laser focused on that exact mission. You know, and it doesn't mean we don't understand what our competitors are doing. Of course we do, but we're not trying to be an Apple Watch, right? We're not trying to be an Oura. Like we're trying to be the very best version of that we can be, that is authentic to who we believe we are, and how we're trying to impact the world, and that's what we stay really focused on. And so yeah, so I think for me, in terms of like making decisions, I always go back to my values, you know, and one of my core, you know, a couple of my core values are growth and impact. And, you know, even at Princeton, you know, I wanted to impact my student athletes in the most positive way possible. And the students I taught, I wanted to help them, you know, understand, you know, cultivate a path, you know, that would not just be with them for their 4 years as a student athlete, but forever, you know, just some baseline skills, you know, that would help them understand, most importantly, who they wanted to be in the world, and understand the kind of the path psychologically and physiologically that will help them get there. And so, you know, I think for me, when I was offered this position at Whoop, which was really risky. I mean, we only had 6 months of runway at the time. And, you know, I did have this very stable, I had 2 young children. I, you know, had a beautiful home and a very stable job. I was taking an enormous pay cut to join the startup. But one of my values of growth, you know, professionally and personally, I knew that this would put me into a whole new territory in terms of like my own growth, and where I knew I really wanted to apply my, intellectually, this like just got me so excited about solving some of these problems with an amazing team, you know, which Will had assembled at Whoop. And then secondly, you know, just impact. You know, I think creating lots of great impact at Princeton, and it was just kind of inside this little bubble. And I was like, wow, you know, what if I had this opportunity to impact at scale, you know, through this mission of unlocking human performance? And so I just went back to, okay, what do I value? And is Whoop an outlet for the things that I value? You know, when we talk about kind of building this framework, it's about identity, and then it's values, and then it's these anchors, it's your habits, and then it's the outlets. Do I have the outlets I need in my life to actually live my values? And once you start to put this little puzzle together, decision making is very clear. Like it wasn't like I was hemming and hawing. I went through this calculus and I was like, I'm going to Boston.
That's amazing. Kristen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's great to meet you.
It's so good to meet you.
Excited to see everything you guys are doing. I hope to speak again soon.
Same. Thanks, Matt.